Welcome to Scrapbook.com's Craft Remix, the place where one set of supplies turns into endless possibilities.
Each episode, 3 incredibly talented crafters take on the same creative challenge.
They all receive the same key items to use in their projects.
And from those same supplies, they each create something completely unique.
3 crafters, 3 different visions, 3 amazing projects.
All in one episode just for you.
This is the Craft Remix.
Okay, then, grabbing this remix bundle, we are going to make a layered project. I know, sounds ambiguous, but hang on to the end and you're going to see how many different ways we can utilize this project. So to craft this, I'm starting with mixed media paper because I want to make an inky background. I'm going to ink it up with this aged paper, distress oxide, along with the tea dye. So I'm using the smooshing technique on this craft mat. And then I'm going to come in with the distress sprayer, add a couple spritzes to the ink as well as the paper. And I'm just dabbing the paper into the color. The only goal I have here with adding this ink to the background is just for not a whole lot of white to be popping through. I just want to kind of age and distress the paper a little bit. And you're going to see how this pops with all the colors later on. The next thing I'm going to need, what we're doing right now is we are prepping all the pieces that are going to come together here when we assemble. So the next thing I wanted to utilize are the autumn leaves. This is a die set from Scrapbook.com. That is one of my most favorite leaf die sets ever. And so I'm using a solid paper from the Sweet Boo paper pad. You can see I have already die cut a bunch of patterns up, but I need a solid because we're going to distress these leaves as well. And you're going to see how that happens. I'm using the Sizzix Scrapbook.com Cherry Blossom Big Shot switch, that's a mouthful, to die cut all these all at once. And this is how I'm going to distress them, is with the distress spritz that is both the fossilized amber as well as the rusty hinge, just kind of depressing halfway. My rusty hinge has more of a stream technique to it. I got to fix that nozzle, but I still got the idea. I just wanted some color on these leaves. The next thing I'm going to do is start preparing from the remix bundle, the nested Polaroid frames. Fabulous frame set. Endless uses with this set. I'm going to use the largest die frame, and with the help of our handy magnetic magic mat that is large enough for this big shot switch, I am going to be able to line up my pattern perfectly with this framed die cut. And that's really important when you have linear patterns like that. While the machine is out and heated up, I'm going to grab the spice paper, and with that creamy solid, I'm going to now die cut the next size down in the Polaroid frames. And so it's just going to go right through the machine here. And I'm going to pop right back out, kind of speeding this up because I think we know how these die machines work. Okay, the next thing I need, I was going to use this tiny little pumpkin from the Hedgehog die set, and we're going to distress that later on as well. Okay, still prepping our pieces for this layered project. I'm taking again the inked background and measuring it so I can cover the top of the Polaroid. I know that makes no sense, but it's how I like it. You can see that there's endless ways already to utilize these frames. We could pop the paper underneath, of course. I'm going to pop it on top. So I'm just trimming that down. And after I trim this down, the offcut is also going to be utilized. And what I'm going to do for this, grabbing the Hedgehog die set, I'm taking the sentiment, which says thanks. I've run it through the machine, and because I have cut it on that mixed media paper, sometimes it doesn't like cut completely, and I'm here for that. I totally want that technique. So I've grabbed a double-sided foam that's an 1/8 inch strip, and I'm running that along the back of that die cut piece because I want the pieces to stay together. Once I pop the whole sentiment word out, as you're going to see here in a moment, you can see that all the little intricate pieces are going to stay together. And that's exactly how I wanted that to be. So we'll set that aside and use it again later. Now back to our inked rectangle. I have placed that inside a stamp platform with the Grip Mate Matte. Love that tool so much. And now the sunflower stamp is going to come into play. Again, this sunflower stamp has multiple ways to colorize it and just make it pop, but I'm crafting what I consider to be background paper, like your own pattern paper. So I'm coming in on the top left edge as well as the bottom right edge with the ink and the stamp. I'm using the Distress Oxide Antique Linen for that. And before I move on, I am kind of cleaning up my stamps as well as that Grip Mate Matte. And so I have now an inked background that has got a layer of stamp flowers on it. And I'm going to layer again with the vintage script in gold. Just a little bit on that right side edge, which you're going to see here in a minute. We're going to turn that around. And I'm also going to transfer that to the top left edge. So I'm just kind of following the pattern here of these two corners, kind of talking to each other, design speaking, and that's how I'm going to be creating this background paper. Now, after I get done with the vintage script, I'm coming in here with the All That Glitters Rub-On Transfer. The All That Glitters Rub-On Transfer is a double layer transfer, but there's these glittery elements to it that I adore, and it's going to add to the texture and to the distressing of this little background canvas. And so I'm just slipped it right underneath the plastic, just adding a little bit of glitter here. And yes, I'm going to come down to that bottom right corner again and add a little bit of glitter there. And it just is fun. Sometimes there's no other reason why we do something except for the fun factor. And I love to have these textual elements playing on this background paper. Okay. Now what I did also, that little pumpkin that we die cut earlier, I'm also coming in with just a little hit of that glitter, just not much at all. You're going to see what that looks like here in a moment. And oh my gosh, it makes me so happy. It makes me so happy. Okay. Now to assemble all the pieces that we have prepped up to this point. Using that 1/8 inch double-sided foam again, I am adding 4 pieces to the back of our little inked canvas, our little background paper. I'm going to pop that on top of the Polaroid frame. You're still going to see that fabulous like stamp edge that is part of the frame. So that's super cool, right? Okay, so we have those 2 layers put together. And now with the next size down Polaroid frame, I'm coming in again with the H paper. I am adding some inking all the way around the edge just to give it a little bit of pop when it gets layered onto our layered project. And also with the tea dye, I'm just hitting the corners a little bit. This just takes a moment to do. You can go crazy with this. We could make this super inky. I just wanted a little hit. Doing the very same thing with the foam adhesive to the back of the frame. And it is also going to be one of our layered pieces here atop of the background canvas. So that is going to be in place. It's not going to be put on straight. It's a little crooked. It's coming over that bottom edge. That was intentional. I like my borders to cross over. Same with the sentiment. It's going to cross over all the layers we have on there so far. Doing the same thing now with an assortment of the leaves that have been pre-cut. I've added a little dot, if you will, of that 1/8 inch foam adhesive. And now I'm just going to play with layering them up. No real rhyme or reason, except for the fact that I did want them to come up that left side, kind of hovering around a bit of the Polaroid frame there. And I usually go with the rule of 3s, and I just add 3 in. This time, however, I am going to be pulling up that really skinny, kind of a delicate sprig. and it's going to pop there at the top. And I love how it adds some extra interest. It adds some height. I just think it's like a little crowning glory. You got to play with this technique and get really used to it yourself. The pumpkin then gets stashed a little bit behind the H on our sentiment. And so the next thing I'm going to add in, I've just grabbed a piece of scrap from the gingham. I have V-notched it. I'm going to distress it, and it's going to pop right behind the leaves as an extra little element. It's a little hit of color. I just think it's kind of fun as well. Lastly, I'm bringing in that hemp twine and going to give it a bow there at the very top. It's a fun little extra texture. And now this layered project can be used for anything that is a card front, a gift enclosure, a tag, a file card, or even on a scrapbook page. Sky's the limit how you utilize this thanks layered project.
Hey everyone, it's Justin Adkins, and I'm so excited to be here for Scrapbook.com's Craft Remix to show a fun way that I envision that you can use these 3 products for your very own project. Of course, we're focusing on the nested stamp Polaroids, the sunflower stamp set, and the hedgehog shaped dies for this project. Now I am pulling in the Spice Smooth Cardstock paper pad. This is an A2 size, and I'm using this for my color inspiration, starting with this sage color, and I am going to distress the edges using some vintage photo distress ink. I have an ergonomic ink blending tool by Pink & Main that I'm going to go ahead and just distress the edges of my paper to give that nice vintage darkened feel to it. So I just like to go ahead and apply the ink, and then once it's set, I'm going to use my sunflower stamps to add a little bit of detail and make this a custom pattern paper. I am going to use a shortcut technique with these stamps that I'm only going to use 2 of the stamps and help by rotating my paper to get everything into place. Using scorched timber distress ink on my sunflower stamps in my rose quartz Misty, I am going to begin the process of stamping out each of my impressions onto my ink blended spice paper. So as you can see, I've got my first little cluster of sunflowers all stamped out, and then I am going to rotate the paper and begin a second impression stamping in the opposite corner. Now, if you want to rotate much easier than what I did, I would recommend putting your paper in the corner of your Misty, but this works too by lining everything up. I'm going to place my second stamp into place in the corner that doesn't have anything stamped out in it. Using my scorched timber distress ink once again, I am then going to stamp out my second image of the sunflower stamp set. Now, I do like to stamp the images off the edge of the paper because it gives a feel that the pattern is going to continue. Next, I'm going to pull in some opaque pale yellow paper splatter to add a little bit of fun texture splatter to our paper. I like to put my paper splatter onto an acrylic block in advance and then pick up the paper splatter with a clean watercolor brush and just lightly tap it onto my panel of paper. Once you're happy with your splatters, just set the panel aside to dry entirely. Next, we're going to be pulling in some more of the colors from the Spice Smooth Cardstock and using some dies from the hedgehog shaped dies to die cut that really sweet little hedgehog figure. So I'm using the cream paper, the neutral brown, and then the dark brown so that we can go ahead and put our little hedgehog together. Here you can see all the little bits ready to go, along with 2 little pink pieces that are going to help with the ear. Using some distress ink in vintage photo, which is the same color we used on our sage paper, I am going to use a mini ink blending tool to just go in and distress the edges of the face of the hedgehog to add a nice variance of color. I love ink blending my die cuts because I think it adds a really nice finished edge. Next, I'm going to pull in the body of the hedgehog along with some ground espresso distress ink. Using the same brown mini blending tool, I am going to distress the edges of the body of the hedgehog to get that same nice variance of color, but because I am blending on a darker paper, I am using a darker ink. Using a Misty Precision glue press and a pair of craft tweezers, I'm now going to begin the process of putting all of my little die cuts into place. Now, it would also be very helpful if you have a craft pick tool, one of those tools with a little waxy edge, to help with the little bits and bobs that need to go into place for this little hedgehog. So I am getting his little feet nicely into place. In addition, we do have his nose and his eyes, which I did die cut from the dark brown paper that I had pulled earlier. In addition, I had said that I did die cut from a light pink cardstock from my stash, 2 little pieces that are going to work for the inside ears of the hedgehog, so I am getting those into place just to help have everything nicely together. And then once the ears are in place, I'm going to add 2 dots towards the lower portion near his nose, and these are going to be the glue spots for my eyes. I do like to put the glue before I put the little die cuts on the paper, and I try to use as minimal of glue as possible. Here you can see what this little hedgehog looks like all put together and ready for our card. I'm also going to be using the 2 thanks dies that are included with the hedgehog shaped dies as our sentiment. So there is an outline die, and then there's almost like a shadow die that goes on top of it, and these are going to help build the thanks sentiment. So I'm using the light tan paper, almost the cream paper from earlier, along with the dark brown paper as well to use for our sentiment. I'm going to use craft tweezers once again along with my liquid adhesive to adhere the outline layer on top of the sort of shadowy layer underneath. And what's going to happen is because there's little cutouts in the dark brown paper, the cream color is going to peek through really nicely. But sometimes with die cuts like this, you have to be mindful of those inner loop letters. For example, this A inside of the arch, there is one little piece you're going to have to adhere inside of it just to give a completed look. Pulling in the nested stamp Polaroids, I am going to use the second largest die, and we are going to die cut it from a darker green paper that's included in the Spice cardstock. I'm also going to pull in sort of an orangey goldenrod paper as well that I'm going to use for the inside of this Polaroid die. So I'm sort of mapping out how much of this piece of paper is going to be needed because I am going to use some rub-on transfers for this paper. So I'm going to use my scissors to trim the green paper down to size, and then what I'm going to do is place that inside of the Flower Garden rub-on transfers. This is the gold. It comes in gold and silver in the pack, and then I am going to just trim off the portion of the rub-on transfers that I will be using, and keeping the rub-on transfer on top and the waxy backing paper on the bottom, I am going to use a hack and process this through my die cutting machine. This is going to save me a lot of time for doing the rub-on to transfer, so what I'm going to do is carefully remove the rub-on top, and here you can see it nicely transferred this pattern perfectly to my green paper. Afterwards, I'm going to be using that die cut of the stamped Polaroid on top of this beautifully gold floral paper that we just created, and I'm going to use it so it's going to die cut out the frame. Here you can see I've got this beautiful gold frame that's got the green underneath, and I think this is going to add a really nice pop to our project. I'm going to use that same Polaroid die on top of that orangish goldenrod paper that we had pulled from the Spice Smooth cardstock as well, and I'm going to use the inner portion of the Polaroid for this card. Using the Vintage Photo Distress ink, I'm going to go ahead and ink blend this little die cut, and this is going to serve, like I said, for inside of that Polaroid, and I wanted to have a little bit of detail as well. So we're going to use some Vintage Photo Distress ink first, and then I'm going to go in second with that Ground Espresso Distress ink, just to give it a little bit of a darker edge on the top. I love my ink blending. I love ink blending my die cuts. I thought this would be a really fun way to carry the colors through the card into different die cut elements. I'm going to pull in that opaque pale yellow paper splatter once again, and then we are going to splatter it onto this panel. It's not going to be as noticeable because I'm essentially splattering a lighter yellow on a darker yellow, but it does add a little bit of a nice variance that the recipient's going to be able to see very nicely. Next, we are going to start the assembly phase for our card. I am going to adhere the green and gold frame with liquid adhesive directly to our prepared card base. Now, this dark green paper is a little bit darker than the sage paper that we had blended in the beginning, so it's going to pop really nicely. And then using liquid adhesive, I am going to put the blended goldenrod piece directly inside of that Polaroid. Using some foam tape, I am going to put our hedgehogs very nicely into place inside of that Polaroid. And then I will be also using some foam tape as well on the back of our thanks sentiment, so I will get that into place to give it some nice lift. Now, before I go in and add some embellishments to our panel, I am going to put it onto my card base, get it nicely adhered, because I am going to pull in some pops of color, and those can take a little bit of time to set, and I didn't want to have to accidentally smudge anything. So I'm pulling in vanilla bean pops of color that I'm going to put some clusters on our project, and then I just think that this is going to coordinate really nicely. This vanilla bean pops of color is essentially the same color as the cream paper that we used for the head of the hedgehog, so I think it's going to really help and pull all of these colors together. Once I have all of my pops of color in place, I'm going to tap the back of my card to help flatten them and get them a little bit of like an enamel dot feel, making them more rounded. With my pops of color in place, my craft remix card is fully completed, and I hope that this card gives you a really fun way to interpret using these 3 fun products together. Thank you, Scrapbook.com, for having me craft along today, and I can't wait to craft with you all very, very soon. Goodbye.
Hey crafty friends, it's Joy Baldwin here, and I am so excited to be one of 3 designers participating in Scrapbook.com's Craft Remix series, where we each take 3 identical products and make a card. The products that we're going to be using today are the hedgehog dies. This has a great sentiment, a hedgehog, a pumpkin, and a cute little heart. Then we have the nested stamp Polaroids dies and the beautiful sunflowers stamp set. I'm also going to be using the Spice smooth cardstock and the Gingham's pattern collection. Both are the A2 size paper pads. I'm using a piece of the cream cardstock from the Spice smooth cardstock paper pad, and I want to stamp a sunflower image from the sunflowers stamp set. I'm just going to stamp this twice, but if you wanted, you could stamp these sunflowers all over the whole background and create a really beautiful patterned paper. I just want them in the top right and the bottom left corners for my card design today. I'm going to ink this up with some black ink. I'll probably do that a couple times just to get a nice, good inked image. And then we're going to use Olo markers to color our sunflowers. I want them to be kind of soft, not super bright, not super dark, because again, this is going to be on the background paper, and I have a lot of other images that I want to put on my card design. So I am using YO 2.5 for the base of my petals on my sunflower here. I want that to be just a little bit darker, and we're already starting on colored cardstock, which is really, really helpful, especially when you're coloring something kind of light. Now I'm using YO 2.3, blending over the darker color, going to the tips of the petals. But because I already have colored cardstock, if I don't get it perfect, it doesn't matter because it really kind of goes with the sunflower. I will create a darker center for the sunflower, well, for both of them, and I'm only going to show you coloring one of them because they will be colored exactly the same. OR 7.6 and 7.4 for the center, and then 7.1 for the leaves. I opted to not go with green, just keeping this kind of neutral on the background. I want to do some splatter with Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink, so I smushed that on my silicone mat and then spritzed it with a little bit of water, and I'm using a paintbrush just to get that splattered all over the background. And I think Vintage Photo adds a nice soft touch to this background. I've already die cut all of my images from the hedgehog dies. This is the body of the hedgehog. All of these colors I die cut from the Spice Smooth cardstock paper pad. Here is the head. I am going to be using the walnut stain. For the body, I used ground espresso, and I'm ink blending again on my silicone mat because it's so easy to clean up. Then I die cut 3 pumpkins. We're going to use Crackling Campfire and just doing a little bit of ink blending. I'm using sponge daubers. I love the size, and I love that they're just on your finger. I feel like I have a lot of control when it comes to the ink blending. I love these. Then we have our little pieces, or the stems for the pumpkins, and those are from one of the brown papers from the Spice cardstock paper pad. And I'm just using my Artiste glue and my Pick Pro tool to add our little stems here. Then we have our hedgehog. I want to add a little bit of dimension behind his head, so I'm going to be using 1mm foam adhesive. And then we have his nose, his eyes, his feet, and the little insides of his ears that we're going to be adhering together. But I need to move his head down just a little bit. And then I can get his nose in place. And I just have all of my die cut pieces in the stack and sort tray, the small one. And I love these, you guys, because then I don't lose, especially the little pieces. Like the eyes are so tiny and I won't lose them. A lot of times I do keep them already in my cardstock, but this time I did not. Here's the little ears from the cream cardstock, and then his little feet that I need to add. And I did use the heart, and I die cut that from one of the Gingham's patterned paper. I'm going to die cut 3 different sizes from the nested stamp Polaroids from the Gingham's patterned paper. The largest Polaroid die there, I'm going to flip that pattern paper over after I'm done die cutting it and use that smallest one there, and then I'll also die cut that medium size one. I die cut those 3 times again from that same cream cardstock from the Spice cardstock paper, and I'm doing a little bit of ink blending on the insert pieces with Vintage Photo because it die cuts out the frame and then these inside pieces, and I wanted those to be different colors, but I thought adding just a little bit of distressing around these will really make them stand out. And then I'm going to add a little bit of that Vintage Photo to the frames, and this gingham right here is my favorite. I love it. I think it's so pretty. Then we have a little bit of yellow, and then the smallest one with a little bit of green. And I'm just really trying to use mainly what's left over on my sponge dauber just to give it a light ink blending around the edges of these dies. Then I die cut the thanks from the Gingham's patterned paper, and I'm doing a little bit of ink blending for that. Okay, let's get our card put together. I'm just going to use liquid glue for the frames of the nested stamp Polaroids, and I'm going to get these laid out first because then I want to pop up the center pieces. I'm going to overlap some of these, and each one of these is going to hold some of the die cut images from the hedgehog dies. So let me get this tiniest one in place here, and then I will be using a 1mm foam adhesive, and I'm going to stick that behind all of those centerpieces that I die cut from the cream cardstock and then did a little bit of ink blending on. And then I'm just using my scissors to trim out my foam adhesive. These are the titanium scissors, and the foam adhesive does not stick to them, which I love because I use tons of foam adhesive. Now that I have all of those in place, I can remove the release paper, and I'm going to use my reverse tweezers and line up my centerpieces and place those down. And look at how that little bit of distressing around the edges makes those backgrounds pop. Let's do our medium size one. So cute. Then we're going to place our hedgehog and one pumpkin in the top one. Then we have our cute heart that's going to go in that little itty bitty stamp Polaroid, which I think is so cute. And again, I die cut that from the pink and red Gingham's patterned paper. Then we have 2 pumpkins we're going to put in this medium size. That first one has 1mm foam adhesive, and then this one will just be adhered directly to the cardstock in the back. Then I'm going to add 1mm foam adhesive to that pumpkin that's going to go along with that hedgehog. I just think this turned out so cute. And then we're going to tuck that pumpkin right there. Then we have our sentiment that I die cut from the Gingham's pattern paper, and that green background piece is from the Spice cardstock paper pad. So let me adhere this down, and I am going to add foam adhesive behind this sentiment as well. But I love that you can see that green right in the center. of all of the letters, and I do have that little tiny piece that goes to the A that I am going to adhere down. What a fun sentiment. I loved bringing in more of that green. And then there's that foam adhesive, and I'm going to center that at the bottom. Let's do a few finishing details on our images here. I love to use a white gel pen, especially on critters, just to add a little something extra. So I'm going to add some white highlights to the face of the hedgehog, and then some little dots where the cheeks would be. And then I'm also going to add highlights to all of the pumpkins and one to the heart. To me, this just gives a really nice finishing detail, and you can do as much or as little as you like. So a little bit of lines, a few little dots. And then I thought it would be cute to add a shiny element, so I am going to bring in some glossy accents to the nose and to the heart. And then this will be adhered to a white A2 size card base. Let's take a look at this up close. And I want to say thank you so much for joining me for this video, and I am so excited to see what the other two designers are going to be creating.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Craft Remix by Scrapbook.com. You can get the bundle today's crafters used. If you create with this kit, upload photos of your projects to the gallery and tag the bundle so that we can see your take on these projects. Remember, the best place to watch videos from Scrapbook.com is at Scrapbook.com/livestream. Thank you to today's instructors, and we will see you in the next episode.